The savanna does not usually offer invitations. It offers warnings. For Ranger Ben, a man whose skin had been cured by 20 years of African sun and dust, the language of the bush was written in the tilt of a blade of grass and the sudden silence of the cicadas. But as the sun began its slow, heavy descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and electric oranges, he encountered a dialect he did not recognize. On a ridge overlooking a dry riverbed stood a lioness. She was a magnificent, battle-scarred alpha, her presence commanding the cooling air. Ben froze, his hand instinctively hovering near the radio on his chest. He knew this cat. She was part of the Southern pride, identifiable by a distinct, missing tip on her left ear, a jagged mark earned in a forgotten territory dispute. Normally, she would have vanished into the shadows of the acacia trees at the sight of a human vehicle, or she would have crouched low, a golden ghost preparing for a hunt. Instead, she stood in the open, her head tossing rhythmically, letting out a low, guttural moan that was too hollow to be a roar and too frantic to be a warning. Ben watched through his binoculars as the lioness paced a tight, nervous circle. She wasn't looking for prey, and she wasn't defending a kill. Her golden eyes were fixed on a patch of overgrown scrub further down the slope, near the ruins of an old colonial-era outpost that the wild had long since reclaimed. Every few seconds, she would look toward Ben's stationary jeep, her tail lashing with an agitation that vibrated through the air. It was a call, stripped of the usual predatory malice. It was the sound of a mother whose world had suddenly narrowed to a single point of failure. The clouds above began to thicken, the first scent of a coming storm riding on a sudden, cool breeze. Ben knew he should keep driving. The rules of the park were clear about non-interference. But the look in those amber eyes was a bridge across a million years of evolution. There was a pulse in the tracker's chest that told him this was not a moment for distance. It was a moment for a choice. He eased the jeep forward, the engine a low hum that seemed to irritate the silence. The lioness did not flee. She didn't even bare her teeth. As he approached the crumbling stone walls of the outpost, she retreated just enough to allow him space, but her gaze remained locked on a specific spot in the earth. Ben stepped out of the vehicle, the dry earth crunching beneath his boots. The air felt heavy, charged with the static of the approaching lightning. He kept his movements fluid and slow, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was 10 yards away from one of the most successful killers on the continent, and she was watching him with a desperate, terrifying expectation. The destination was a forgotten well, a deep shaft of stone and mortar hidden beneath a treacherous layer of rotted timber and tall grass. It was a relic of a failed farm from a century ago, a literal hole in the world that the grass had done its best to hide. As Ben neared the edge, the lioness moved with him, pacing parallel at a distance that felt both respectful and threatening. She let out another whine, a high-pitched sound that broke Ben's heart before he even saw what was down there. He knelt at the rim, peering into the gloom. The well was deep, 20 feet at least, and the air rising from it smelled of damp earth and old moss. At the bottom, amidst a pile of soft debris and fallen wood, was a small, tawny shape. It was a cub, no more than 3 months old, its fur matted with dust. The cub looked up, its eyes reflecting the faint, dying light of the golden hour. It let out a rasping, exhausted mewl. It had been down there for a long time, likely clawing at the slick stone walls until its strength failed. Ben looked back at the mother. She was standing inches from the well's edge now, her massive paws tensed, her head lowered so that her breath puffed out in small clouds of mist. She was close enough that Ben could see the individual whiskers on her muzzle and the raw texture of her notched ear. She could have ended his life in a single motion, but she remained frozen in a state of agonizing helplessness. She knew the cub was dying, and she knew she lacked the anatomy to save it. The first roll of thunder rumbled across the plains, a deep, percussive warning that the storm was no longer a threat. It was an arrival. Rain in this part of the world was a blessing, but here it would be a death sentence. The well had no drainage. Within an hour of a heavy downpour, the bottom would become a muddy grave. Ben looked at the sky, then at the rope in the back of his Jeep. He was alone. There was no backup coming before the clouds broke. The conflict within him was sharp. To leave was to witness a tragedy. To stay was to put his life in the jaws of a predator who might misunderstand his intentions the moment he touched her young. He saw the lioness nudge a piece of loose stone into the well with her nose, watching it fall with a look of profound grief. In that moment, the tracker's pulse synchronized with the heartbeat of the wild. Ben worked with a mechanical focus, trying to ignore the 300-pound shadow that stalked his every move. He anchored the climbing rope to the heavy steel winch on the front of his Jeep, checking the knots twice with trembling fingers. The lioness was no longer pacing. She had become a statue of golden muscle, her face inches from the rope as Ben looped it around his harness. He could smell her, a heavy, musky scent of dried grass and old blood. It was the smell of the apex, the smell of power. He realized then that he wasn't just fighting gravity. He was negotiating a truce with an ancient instinct. As he stepped over the lip of the well, the lioness leaned forward, her notched ear twitching. For a terrifying second, her face was level with his, her amber eyes searching his soul for a reason to trust him. Descending into the well felt like leaving the world of the living. The temperature dropped, and the sounds of the savanna faded, replaced by the hollow echo of his own breathing. Above him, the circle of the sky was turning a violent shade of indigo. The lioness's silhouette blocked out half the light. She was peering down, her claws occasionally scraping against the stone rim, sending small showers of grit onto Ben's shoulders. He reached the bottom and found the cub huddling in the corner. It hissed, a tiny, frail sound of defiance. Ben spoke in a low, rhythmic whisper, the same tone he used when calming skittish horses. He didn't see the cub as a predator. He saw it as a flickering flame that was about to be extinguished. He reached out, his gloved hand trembling. The cub snapped at him, its needle-like teeth catching the fabric of his sleeve. Ben didn't pull away. He waited, letting the cub realize he wasn't a threat. Outside, the first heavy drops of rain began to pelt the earth, clicking against the stone like a countdown. He could hear the lioness above, her moans turning into a frantic, low-frequency growl that vibrated through the very walls of the well. She could hear the rain, too. She knew the water was coming. Ben grabbed the heavy canvas transport bag, gently but firmly scooping the small, shivering animal inside. The cub fought for a moment before the darkness of the bag settled its nerves. Ben pulled the drawstring tight and signaled the rope. But as he looked up, he realized a catastrophic problem. The rotted timber at the top had shifted under his weight. The rope was wedged deep into a narrow crack in the stone, and the winch on the Jeep was straining, unable to pull him past the lip. He was stuck, dangling 5 feet below the surface, with a storm breaking overhead and a mother lion watching his struggle. The rain turned from a drizzle to a deluge in a matter of seconds. Water began to pour over the sides of the well, a cold, muddy curtain that threatened to blind him. Ben kicked against the stone, trying to find a foothold to lever himself up, but the moss was too slick. He was trapped, hanging by a thread, holding the most precious thing in the lioness's world. He looked up, his eyes stinging from the rain, and saw her. The lioness was not attacking. She was leaning over the edge, her massive forepaws braced against the crumbling stone. She saw the bag and she saw the man. In an act that defied every rule of biological aggression, she reached out. Ben watched in disbelief as the lioness opened her mouth, not to roar, but to grip. She didn't grab Ben. She lunged for the thick, reinforced nylon handle of the gear bag that was clipped to his harness. Her teeth sank into the material with the precision of a surgeon. She began to back away from the well, her powerful neck muscles bulging as she added her 300 pounds of raw strength to the mechanical pull of the winch. It was a sight of impossible cooperation, the machine and the beast working in a synchronized tug-of-war against the abyss. Ben felt himself being hoisted upward, the rope groaning as it cleared the snag in the stone. The lioness didn't stop until Ben's shoulders cleared the rim. As he scrambled onto the muddy ground, gasping for air and soaked to the bone, she released her grip. Ben collapsed in the dirt, the rain washing the sweat from his face. He quickly unclipped the bag and set it on the ground between them. He was vulnerable, exhausted, and lying at the feet of a predator. The lioness stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look at Ben. Her entire being was focused on the canvas bag. Ben reached out with a steady hand, his fingers unknotting the drawstring. He pulled the fabric back, revealing the damp, shivering cub. The mother let out a sound that Ben would remember for the rest of his life. A soft, breathy chuff of pure relief. The storm raged around them, but in the small circle of light near the old well, there was a profound, quiet peace. The lioness began to lick the cub, her rough tongue stripping away the mud and the smell of the well, replacing it with her own scent. She worked with a ferocity of love, her massive head dwarfing the tiny creature. The cub, sensing its mother's warmth, let out a loud, rhythmic purr that competed with the sound of the thunder. Ben stayed where he was, sitting in the mud, his back against the stone wall. He knew he should move, but his legs wouldn't carry him. He was a witness to something sacred, a moment where the veil between the human and the wild had been drawn back to reveal a shared soul. As the lioness finished cleaning her young, she stopped and turned her head. She looked at Ben. There was no growl, no flattening of the ears. She stood up, her notched ear dripping with rainwater, and took 2 steps toward him. Ben didn't flinch. He felt a strange, calm clarity. The lioness lowered her head, her muzzle inches from his chest, and for a fleeting second, she leaned her weight against his knee. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a brief contact that carried the weight of 1,000 words. Ben reached out, his hand moving through the cold rain, and let his fingers graze the top of her head, just once. Her fur was coarse and thick, vibrating with the power of her life force. Then, as quickly as the moment had begun, she pulled away. She picked up the cub by the scruff of its neck, the small animal dangling limply and safely from her jaws. With one last look toward the man who had descended into the dark for her, she turned and vanished into the purple shadows of the storm. Ben sat alone in the rain for a long time, watching the spot where she had disappeared. The tracker's pulse had slowed, but it felt different now, fuller, steadier. He realized that the world was not a collection of separate lives, but a single, tangled web of breath and blood. When the stakes are life and death, the walls we build between ourselves and the wild do not just crack. They vanish entirely, leaving only the raw, beautiful truth of our shared existence. The strength of the wild is not found in the kill, but in the lengths a heart will go to ensure that life continues against the odds. What do you think was the most important moment in this encounter? Was it the ranger's decision to go down? or the lioness's decision to help him back up? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more cinematic stories of the incredible bonds that connect us all.